Another big misconception about Mexico is that foreigners can't own land here. And that's a fallacy that's been around since, and wrong, for about the last 3 decades. And yet we still hear people professing it, especially on the internet, as if it were the gospel truth, that they knew. The fact of the matter is that the foreigners have been able to buy and own land in Mexico since about 1974. It's the protected zone, the restricted zone, that's been off limits to foreigners, especially the land that runs from the coastal water line inland for 50 kilometers or about 32 miles. And of course, that's where the really desirable beachfront properties are. But the Mexican government finally woke up one day in 1994 and realized that outside of its oil and gas reserves, land along the coastline was their most valuable legal asset. And the foreigners like us would be willing to pay handsomely for it, especially considering the fact that it's probably the last available, buildable, affordable beachfront property there is in the entire Western Hemisphere. So, in order to appease both the old guard congressional leaders who wanted no foreign ownership whatsoever with the zones or anywhere else, and the new progressive government that understood that physical boundaries and protection from invading armies that the zones were designed to protect, were totally unnecessary in today's digital age. They created a sort of middle ground that resulted in the creation of the fideicomiso, or a trust, an instrument that allows non-Mexicans to buy and own property here in the restricted zone through an accredited Mexican bank. Now, as a trust, the fideicomiso is a lot like the living trust that I and maybe you have right now, protecting your home and other valuable properties that we want covered and protected and set up to pass on to future generations, maybe because of tax or other considerations. I don't know what yours is set up to do, but that's what mine is. And it's set up between you and the Mexican bank so that the bank can administer it as your nominee, doing whatever you want them to do while making sure that in the eyes of the Mexican law it's legal. That's all. You're free to do with what you want with your property, and you're free to hold it. You can build on it, sell it. They don't care. And while we're on the subject of property, there's another seemingly perpetual fallacy that the internet just won't let die. And that's this ridiculous idea that the Mexican federales are just waiting for you to finish building your home so they can come in guns a-blazing and take it all away from you. Hogwash. It doesn't work that way. The Mexican government doesn't want your little beachfront hacienda anywhere, much less in little old San Felipe. They want your money. They want you there spending your money. And they want your friends and your relatives there spending their money too, because that's what the country runs on. Tourism and foreign investment, not invasion of property, especially American investment. And that's especially true now, because according to statistics from Statista, the COVID-19 pandemic absolutely destroyed the country's tourism revenue. In fact, it's dropped more than 50% as of September in 2020, based on a year-over-year comparison. That's because the country's municipal and international tourism volume plummeted by nearly 60%, meaning the country's gross domestic product, or GDP, dropped from 8.9% pre-COVID to just 4.7% today. Now, to make the impact perfectly clear, that's about the same as having your boss come into you one day and say, "Hey, sorry, buddy, but we're going to have to furlough you for 2 of the 5 days you work for us each week." And just like you can't pay your bills working on only 3 days a week, without a national income, they can't run the country. And if that's not enough argument for you, then consider these few well-documented facts as issued by our own State Department. There are now an estimated 1.5 million American expats living throughout Mexico. 4 of America's largest hotel chains own the property that they're sitting on in Mexico's coastal restricted zones. And as for individual property ownership, that same U.S. State Department, get this, they estimate that there's more than 173,000 Americans down here right now today calling the Mexican coastline properties and coastal cities home. Well-developed and now very expensive coastline properties in well-developed and now very expensive coastline cities like Cabo and Mazatlan, Cancun and Tulum, Playa del Carmen and Puerto Vallarta. All those expats who own properties in those cities properties that are a part of a community that typically evolved out of a small fishing village, just like San Felipe, and properties all appreciating in value from their humble beginnings, just like San Felipe, each of them owns their property through a fideicomiso, 173,000 Americans. The difference between the expats in those cities and the expats at Rancho Costa Verde and San Felipe is that while they all sit in mainland Mexico, right in the middle of the American and Latin American drug trade, where they're far more susceptible to violence than in San Felipe, Rancho Costa Verde. San Felipe and Rancho Costa Verde sit quietly on the east coast of the Baja Peninsula, 150 miles and a world away from the closest drug route in mainland Mexico. Now, if those properties aren't being invaded, if those homes aren't being taken, if those Americans aren't worried about being killed or caught up in the drug wars where the blood really is running in the streets, then can you please tell me why in the world people in little old, off the beaten path, San Felipe and Rancho Costa Verde like me should be worried about the government coming in and taking their homes? It simply doesn't make any sense. And yet the fallacy persists. Okay, you say, but what about the violence? Isn't Mexico the murder capital of the world? And what did it do, somehow just skip San Felipe?
Oh, shit.
Good question. Let's talk about that in the next chapter. Okay, so that's how we're powering the development, but how about waste disposal? I mean, the whole development is sitting right next to the Sea of Cortez, an ecological wonder, and the place that, again, Jacques Cousteau called the world's aquarium. It's the most protected sea sanctuary in the entire world, and the government banned septic systems here years ago. Well, here's another instance where the development team was way ahead of its time. By incorporating a then groundbreaking technology known as aerobic biotreatment into individual systems, Rancho Costa Verde not only satisfied the governmental strict oversight committees, it won accolades from the country's top eco-groups whose sole mission it is, and was then, to protect Mexico's rich heritage for the future generations. So you see, each home here is equipped with an underground extended bioaeration waste system that's no larger than a couple of 55-gallon drums that are turned on their sides, which are buried so they're never going to see the light of day again. And inside this two-chamber process, air and oxygen are introduced into the organic matter that comes from the home, which sits in the first chamber. And that agitates the waste and promotes its natural growth of bacteria, growth that in turn digests the organic matter in the liquid. And after aeration, the mixture is introduced into the second chamber where it rests, allowing the now suspended solids to settle right to the bottom of the chamber. And it's this continual process that results in the purification of the liquid being separated from the solids and coming out as simple garden water that's 98% pure H2O. Clear enough and clean enough, almost to drink, but certainly enough to irrigate plants and other landscape around the home. And the smell? There is none. The bioorganic process filters out most of the compounds that cause the smell in the first place, and its chlorinator eliminates any danger of incidental bacteria. And in addition to reducing water consumption and its attendant cost, this aerobic treatment system also greatly reduces the biochemical oxygen demand, or BOD, which is a common measure of air pollution. In fact, the unit is so economical, so eco-sensitive, and so environmentally safe that the entire system uses just 67 watts of power and creates enough water to easily sustain the home's landscaping. So the result is, outside of the inspection caps that are typically integrated into the landscape and never seen, the only thing that's going to reveal the system's even in place is the landscaping and green grass that our residents may have outside their homes. All because Rancho Costa Verde was committed to doing things a better way, a cleaner way, and a more ecologically responsible and economically conservative way. So when I say that San Felipe is virtually crime-free, You've got to understand that I'm speaking specifically to the fact that Baja is somehow always wrapped up in Mexico as a country. And so it gets painted by the news media as awash in the same murders that has the streets running red with blood, like in Juarez or Sonora, for example. What the news media conveniently leaves out, though, and the public never sees, is the fact that the violence that plagues Mexico, it's largely in mainland Mexico. San Felipe and Rancho Costa Verde, we're not in mainland Mexico. We're here in Baja, about 150 miles over water and a lifetime away from mainland Mexico and virtually all the cartel drug routes. And what little drug trade there is in Baja? It's concentrated in the border town of Tijuana, which is, as the State Department correctly reports, the most dangerous city in all of Mexico. But our little San Felipe, we're almost 250 miles away from Tijuana and on the other side of the peninsula. And Rancho Costa Verde here, we're another 30 miles or so south of there. So when I say that San Felipe is relatively crime-free, I'm speaking to the fact that the town has seen exactly one homicide incident in the last 25 years. That's a quarter of a century ago, way back in 1996. And that incident, it only resulted in the deaths of a couple of gang members. No civilians. So when I say that our sleepy little community is virtually crime-free, again, that's what I'm talking about. Now, contrast that with our local and national news networks reporting on the multiple gang war killings, mass school shootings, shopping center shootings, rapes, assaults, and other violent crimes that are happening daily in cities across America, incidents in which dozens of innocent people are killed or injured every day in the U.S. And it quickly becomes apparent that while there's something definitely wrong somewhere, it isn't in the little villages and residential communities of the Baja Peninsula, like San Felipe or Rancho Costa Verde or Loreto or any of the other seaside communities here in Baja. Here's a good example. We currently live in a little country town in North Los Angeles County where there hasn't been a homicide in the last 64 years that I know of. But in a county which the murder rate so far this year sits at 289 people, should I be worried that somehow we're not safe out riding our horses during the day or walking to the store at night because we live in a county whose murder and violent crime stats are up 36% over last year, the highest jump in over half a century? Or in a country where the murder rate has jumped by 30% in the last year, the highest increase in 60 years? Of course not. Because we don't live in Watts or Compton or East LA or any of the other most dangerous parts of the county that account for the majority of those 289 homicides. We're almost 100 miles away. Just like San Felipe is about 250 miles away from the violence as recorded in Tijuana and on average more than 2,700 miles away from the real murder capitals of the country, Juarez and Acapulco and Cancun. That's right. Acapulco ranks 7th and Cancun is 25th on the country's list of most dangerous cities. So, if all of this is true, then what's the downside of living in San Felipe or Rancho Costa Verde? I'm glad you asked because we're going to talk about that next.